So I have a hybrid approach where Emilio stayed in all albergues. I attempt to stay in albergues, but I like to have some flexibility, and so I stayed in a combination. I chose to start in Ferrol because I love getting the Compostela, although I did not want to miss out on A Coruña because I heard how amazing it was and I had done a lot of research about it. Um, I usually do my Caminos in the spring. This happened to be pretty late in the spring. It was sandwiched in between two trips in France. I had a 10-day tour in France with my mother around Mother's Day, and then I flew to Santiago on a cheap Vueling Airlines flight, and I didn't stop and look around in Santiago at all. I took a train right up to A Coruña, which I had a nice Tourgrino day, like Emilio mentions. And then after I finished my Camino, I went back to Paris and I met my husband in France, and so we had 10 days there. So I was gone for a whole month. So my Camino was a nice in-between stage between two trips. So I had that one night in A Coruña being a tourist and one night in Ferrol. And this question has come up before. I took a bus from A Coruña to Ferrol. It was only about €7 and it took about 35 minutes. I walked 7 days. I split two traditional stages. I stayed in 3 municipal albergues and 4 private rooms. And I ended it with 3 nights in Santiago at Seminario Menor. And this was my second Camino. I had learned a lot of lessons on my first Camino. And so I didn't make some rookie mistakes the second time around. And I had fun, a really good time. So here's a nice map that Emilio put together with the places that I stayed. And my Camino philosophy, I like to start with a blessing. Usually when I leave home, I get a blessing from my home church parish. But when I'm already traveling, I like to get a blessing before I start the Camino. So I ended up going to a mass in Ferrol at the Iglesia San Francisco, which is right next to the Parador. And it was not a pilgrim mass, it was just a regular mass. And I asked the priest at the end for a blessing, and they're always happy to oblige. There happened to be a nice Vespers song ceremony afterwards, so I got to stay for that. I also like to do a little seaside baptism in local waters before I start any Camino, or for that matter, whenever I travel, I like to take a dip in the ocean, lake, river, streams, or whatever, just to kind of have a ritual baptism to begin my Camino. And I like to splurge a little. I'm a fan of the Paradors, but I also like to save a lot. So in the end, you'll see I have a cost sheet where I have all of the costs where I stayed, and it ends up evening out as a really good value, even if I splurge a little. I prefer to travel Caminos alone. It allows for more flexibility. I also bring my own backpack, so I can have the flexibility of stopping when I want and having just more flexibility on that. I also am one of those slow strollers. I really enjoy lollygagging, taking photos, resting when I feel like it, and not rushing. And I do enjoy a good salt bath, so when I'm staying in a hotel that has a good bathtub, I look for a market that has the marine salts, which are only about €1 to €2 per kilo bag, and it just works wonders on your body after you've been hiking all day. And I also just kind of have this philosophy of serendipity, like live in the moment, let things happen, and walk in awe and wonder. So my pre-Camino day in A Coruña, I had started that day at 6 a.m. in Paris, and after flying to Santiago, training to A Coruña, walking through the town, eventually I got to my hotel right across from this beach. So I got settled in and I took a nice stroll. I had that baptism in the waters here, and it's just a gorgeous beach. There's actually a few beaches in this region, and this was a very big one. Emilio had a nice picture of it. But there's also a Tower of Hercules. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site tower, and it's still a working lighthouse on the top of it. If you pay a couple of euros, you can walk all the way up in the tower, up to the very top, and you get an incredible view of the surroundings. I highly recommend going up this tower. It was remodeled in the Renaissance, by the way, but it was originally built in, I guess it was the Roman times. So history meets technology. The Camino Inglés is the only Camino that has a system of QR codes on markers, on way markers. So you can bring your phone up to this QR code on these signs and you will get a little bit of history on whatever site you're looking at, whatever marker you're at. There are, at the time I was doing this, there were 54 QR codes, and they had just started the system probably a year before I walked, which was 2017. And on the right you can see what comes up on your mobile phone, and it's in different languages, but you can learn about, you know, the churches or whatever whatever you're looking at, monuments. It's really nice to get a little bit of history. Okay. So, starting in Ferrol, it was very nice. I did stay at the Parador, and I walked around the waterfront, had a nice meal, got my first stamp, and my first day of walking was just lovely. The Parador gives you a nice breakfast, so I enjoyed that, and I knew this was going to be a shorter day, so I took my time. I don't think I left Ferrol until about 10:30. So some people miss Neda. This was about an 8.5 mile walk for my first day, but I took the recommendation of Susan Jagannath, who is the author of Camino Inglés in 6 days or less. She recommended staying in Neda, and I loved that. So I first attempted to stay at the Albergue. This is the municipal albergue. It's not very old, but when I was there in 2017, unfortunately it seemed neglected. There was graffiti on the walls. There was nobody there inside to take our money or stamp our credentials. And I just looked around. There were a few other pilgrims. I just didn't feel like I wanted to stay there. I took one look in the bathroom, actually, and the showers were really disgusting. So I looked on a Facebook group. Shout out to John Rafferty, aka Johnny Walker Santiago. He runs a Facebook group for the Camino Inglés, and I saw some Australians who were a day ahead of me, or they were actually there in Neda at the same time, and they said they're staying at this other place. So I thought I would check it out. I just walked up a little hill and looked at this other place, and I got a private room with a sink and a bathroom down the hall for 14 euros. And I had met another pilgrim along the way, and both of us, her name is Nancy, she ended up being my Camino family the whole time. But I asked her if she would like to go check out this pension. And she got the room that had a bathroom inside it. That was 22 euros. So we were happy with this change. This was our view. and it just was sparkling and gorgeous, and the fresh air that was coming in. And because it was kind of a short stage, once I got settled in, I just did a nice walkabout in the small town of Neda and watched the sunset and went to a market across the street from this pension. And I met up with the Australian couple who told me about it and had a nice dinner at this Pension Maragotto. So the next day, once we got close to Pontedeume, this beautiful white sandy beach was a total surprise. I had no idea that there would be such a gorgeous beach here. So after we had a nice lunch at a chiringuito bar right on the water, Nancy and I asked the bar owner if we can leave our backpacks there at the restaurant so we can go play in the water. And this is one of those serendipity moments. So we were able to go and leave our packs for a while and frolic in the waves and ride in the sand and cool down. It was an exceptionally hot time of year for us, which I think is unusual for Galicia, but it was really nice to have a dip in this water before we arrived in Pontedeume. And here is the beautiful Pontedeume. I tried to stay at the albergue here too, the same thing. There was no hospitalero there to take our money or welcome us in. Also, when I looked at the bunk beds up on the top loft area, it felt very claustrophobic to me. So Nancy and I had the time and energy to look around a little bit more, and we ended up staying in a hotel with a view of the river. And so I think, housing, accommodations on the Inglés, for me at least, the odds were good, but the goods were odd, I have to say. So if you have some flexibility, look around a little bit, and there's some options, at least in the springtime. That evening we had a nice dinner. The pulpa was excellent at this bar, and generous portions of tapas, which is the case I found along all of the Inglés. Tapas were generous. We even got breakfast tapas, so you order some coffee and we got some kind of muffin, or in one place I even got churros. So the walk continues, Pontedeume to Betanzos. This was a beautiful walk, kind of challenging. It was hilly. Just because the Camino Inglés is the shortest Camino, it doesn't mean it's the easiest. There's definitely some challenges. And this is crossing over into Betanzos, which is another medieval town in Galicia. It's quite hilly. There's a lovely church in the not far from the municipal albergue, which I stayed at. And you can see there's a sculpture of St. James on a horse right above those green doors. And I thought this was an interesting installation of murals of all the medieval towns in Galicia. So out of these 7, I've been to 3, and I've been to 4: Santiago, Coruña, Betanzos, and Tui, and Lugo, actually. So their crest of arms and flags, it's kind of a nice mural installation. And then continuing on, Betanzos to Presedo. This is another half stage, because the following stage, if I would have combined this with the next stage, it would have been pretty grueling, because the part after Presedo is quite steep, as I think Emilio pointed out. So one of the things I enjoyed, and you see this on other Caminos too, is you're sometimes walking below the forest floor level on paths that have been trodden by pilgrims and cattle, and you're below the forest floor. And it was cooler, and I just felt really grounded walking through this groove in the earth that, imagining pilgrims walking before me, hundreds of years ago through the same grooves in the earth. And, walking 6 feet under, and I never felt so alive. And Presedo has a small municipal albergue. It's in the middle of farm country, but there is one restaurant, and it's a very colorful one, called Meson Museo. There's an artist that has these colorful paintings all over the place, and they grow their own produce. So everything is fresh, the salad is fresh, and the meal was really good. And of course they have the cañas, the fresh Estrella Galicia. And had a good night's sleep on day 4. So day 5, this was the one that had the most elevation gain, 10 miles, but almost 2,000 feet elevation gain. And from what I understand, they rerouted this section of the Camino since then. I think they did it to make it easier. Personally, I really loved this walk this day. So I hope they have it as an option, as an alternate. I saw a lot of this prayer card that pilgrims left along the way. And it was a healing prayer. I saw that throughout, so that was kind of nice. I stopped and read that at one of the places. And here is where the two caminos converge, Hospital de Bruma. There's a municipal albergue there, and the owners or managers of it are pictured on the right, and they're holding up a book that I use. It's a guidebook that was written by Johnny Walker Santiago, and they're really friendly and welcoming. And this was a place where I really had a pilgrim camaraderie experience. It was fun to see more people and meet some interesting people. The two women in the lower picture there on the left had been on a different Camino, and that crosses into the Camino Frances, and they had walked the Camino Frances so many times. So they decided to switch over to the Inglés, and they walked from A Coruña. And so I met them there, and I know they're famous peregrinas. Were wonderful to meet, and I saw them again in Santiago. And actually I saw them again the very next day by the crazy statues, which Rob will show you. So this was a day that was, what goes up must come down. So it was long, but it was all downhill. And so it felt like an easy walk. And I thought this was very sweet. Cartas is where the mail goes, Pan is where the bread is delivered. Walking through a neighborhood. And in Sigueiro, there was a nice pilgrim dinner at a local restaurant where we had pasta and pulpo and a lot of wine that night, the night before our last day. And I mentioned the breakfast tapas, which I thought were interesting. This place had fresh churros and a little almond cake when you order a café con leche. And a beautiful church with a crucero. There were a lot of cruceros on this Camino Inglés. And finally, my arrival in Santiago. There's the cathedral with the scaffolding. I had that great euphoric feeling of arriving, and unlike the year before, I had a room reserved, so I didn't have to worry about finding a place. I thought my friend Nancy had beat me there, but she didn't. She stopped for tea along the way. So I waited and I put on my layers, and when she arrived, I was there to greet Nancy. And here is a spreadsheet of where I stayed and the accommodations and the costs. And even though I stayed in a Parador, which cost €80, but included a nice breakfast, my average cost was only 21 euros, so that's about $25 for accommodations. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I have all of my details. I have a route report on my website, thecaminoprovides.com, so you can go there, and I have all of my tracking and more photos and some videos there. So I'm gonna